Fast Forward 289, welcome back. I'm Larry. So tonight we're going to be working on my 351 Cleveland again, and we're going to be looking at the oil pump. So let's jump into it and get started. This is my new oil pump, obviously it's clean, and then that's the original one out of the engine. Now, I always open my oil pumps up just to look at them, to inspect them. Even though it's new, you just never know. So, because I've heard of people putting in new oil pumps and then it twists their shaft in half because a piece of metal was lodged in there or something. It could be from your build, but it could be from the manufacturing process as well. So I always open mine up and just kind of take a look inside, spin it around, make sure everything moves smoothly. And in case you wonder, this is how an oil pump works, in case you didn't know. So that's what it looks like inside. But I just like to look at everything, make sure it works smoothly back and forth, which it does, and then just get an idea of it. Now, I also want to show you, because this is a high volume oil pump. And so that's what I'm going with on my build. And then this is the original factory standard oil pump. And I just want to show you a side-by-side comparison of what the differences between the two actually are. So you can see on the high volume oil pump, this gear is actually a little bit bigger than the standard pressure one. And that's really about your only difference, because this is a high volume standard pressure. So the pressure will be the same as far as your max pressure whenever you're in the RPMs. But the idle pressure will be a little bit higher. And that's really your only difference. But other than that, virtually the same. So now that I've opened this up, I've looked at it, I make sure it's good. We're gonna go ahead and put the cap back on, put a little bit of blue Loctite on there, and these new bolts do come with lock washers. But I still like to put a little bit of Loctite on them and then put them on. Now on an oil pump, there is no gasket, so it's just a bare metal plate. You can see there's no gasket. You do not install a gasket on an oil pump, so it's not needed, it's not necessary. It's submerged in oil all the time anyway, so it's really not needed. The cap is just to make sure these gears don't fall out, basically, is all it does. Now we will prime this pump, but I'm not going to put anything in here, no grease or anything like that. Just when we get ready to install it, I'll pour some oil in the hole and turn the pump by hand, and then that will force oil in there to kind of prime it before it's ever put in the engine. Really. Now, as far as torquing these down go, I don't use a torque spec. I just tighten them by hand in a crisscross pattern. Nice and snug. That's really all you need. So when I took this off, honestly, it weren't even that tight. So I'm putting it back tighter than they had it. All right, so the next step we got to do is install our pickup tube, but we also got to figure out, since this one threads in instead of just bolting in, we've got to figure out where it needs to be in relation to the engine. So we're going to do that now. And the oil's off of there. All right, so before I even put the pump up there, we need to install our pickup tube. That way we can adjust it and see where it needs to be before we finally tighten it down. And this is just to get it in place where we need to be. So we'll loosely, or we'll hand tighten, I should say, the pump on here with no gasket, just to get this figured out. And then once we figure out where this needs to be, and we actually put this here permanently, then we'll come back and put a gasket on here and torque this down. And just by eyeballing it, probably needs to be somewhere right there. All right, so after some mucking around, I finally figured out what everything needs to be. So I went ahead and, like I said, I bolted the old pump down, no gasket because it's so thin it don't matter. It's not going to take up any thickness. So we just bolt it down hand tight for now. To check everything, I lay my gasket up here to set my oil pan up to make sure everything clears. And I put me a mark on here to show where it needs to be. Now we're going to take this off. And I'm going to have to actually tighten that pickup down the full way. But this mark will tell me where I need to stop at. So how you find this is we got to measure the oil pan and make sure that it will clear this properly. So we're going to take a straight edge. We're going to lay it on top of the pan. And what you want to do is take a tape measure, and you want to put the tape measure about right where the pickup would be, which is right about in the center of the pan, more toward the back. In this case, this is a 351 modified 400 truck pan, but it's the same as a Cleveland pan. Same depth, same width, same everything. No different. Only difference is the plug is in the back of a truck pan. The Cleveland is on the side. So it's more toward the back of the pan, but in the center of the pan. So we're just going to take our straight edge and put up there, and we're going to measure it. And I've measured it in several different spots in this pan, and it's the same measurement every single time. So it actually doesn't really matter, to be honest with you. But when we measure, we get 8 3/8, add a 1/16 for the gasket thickness, so 8 7/16. All right, so when it comes to this, we're going to just lay our straight edge against the cup of the pickup. And the way I've been doing is measuring from the block right here next to the main cap, because the same thickness is where the gasket, or it's on the same plane as where the gasket will be, it's the same level. So we'll put our straight edge up here and check it. And we got about 8 1/8 on this side, and it should be the same on this side as well. And it is. I got 8 1/8 on both sides. So it's dead level across. With that, if we look at, so we started at, let's say it was 8 7/16, like I said, when you factor in the gasket thickness. So that gives us 8 1/8. You count from the 1/8. That's 1/16, 1/8, 3/16, 1/4, 5/16 of clearance. So it should be good enough. Usually they say 3/8 to 1/2 inch clearance. So we got about 5/16, 3/8 right in that range. And from everything I found, you want 3/8 to 1/2 inch clearance. But one thing to keep in mind is on a Cleveland, this is not your pickup. This is a cup. Now, obviously, you don't want it resting all the way up against the oil pan and blocking it off, but it's not going to create a tight seal either unless you really just press it. But regardless, this is not the pickup. Your pickup is in here below the strainer. And even the strainer, well, the strainer is about even with the cone, but it's just a soft mesh. Your pickup is down inside of here. That's where it's at. So it would be probably 1/2 inch or a little more than that from the actual oil pan itself. The cone itself is above the oil pan 5/16 to 3/8 of an inch. Now, for some reason, I can't find hardly anything about Cleveland's using a stock pickup. This is why I decided to go this way, just make it even on both sides. And then I know that it'll be fine. I check the pan, I check the height here. I know I have 5/16, 2 3/8 between the cone and the pan, which means I got even more clearance between the actual pickup and the pan itself. So this is dead level on both sides, and so that's all you can do to it. That's the best way to go about installing it from what I see. I did check the pumps. I checked everything against my old one, my original pump and pickup tube. The new pickup tube and original pickup tube are the exact same height, everything. I put them on the table flat, upside down, with the threads facing each other, and they are the exact same height, no difference. So this is no different. The oil pump, even though this is a high volume oil pump, it is no higher. The body is a little bit higher because the gear is a little taller. But when I put the pumps side by side, the port for the threads are the exact same height. This is the exact same height. Everything is the exact same height, just the top is a little bit different. And that's it. Install the oil pan to show you that everything clears. Now, keep in mind also, we have a seal that goes back here and a seal up here on the timing cover, which obviously I don't have the timing cover on here yet, but it will be there. Now, you can't put those on and then put the oil pan up here and say, okay, it clears without hitting anything, because those are going to be compressed down to the oil pan gasket. So I always put the oil pan gasket up here and use it as the reference, because even though you will smash this, a little bit will compress it some, you're going to compress those front and rear oil pan seals down to this seal. So always keep that in mind as well. So we put the oil pan on here, and it sits right on down. It's not touching anything. We have room. See, it's not hitting. And we're good to go there. So now, and you can come in the oil pan hole here and look, but really, to look here, you can't tell much because it looks like it's pressing up against it, because you can't see the way this plug is angled in, and it's lower. You can't really see up in here. And I'll show you what I mean. So you can see there's the pickup. You can see the pickup in there, but it don't matter how low you go, you can't really see it. But like I said, we know that it's clearing because we took a measurement, and we have at least 5/16, right, 5/16, 3/8 clearance, which is fine for this. So that'll be good to go, and we don't have to worry about that anymore. So now that we have all that checked, we can take our gaskets back off so they don't get messed up. And we will now remove our oil pump and finalize, put this in here. All right, so since we have our reference mark, we can take this out, because now we'll know where to stop at. All right, so I can't really hardly find anything about installing these pickup tubes. Not on YouTube, not on forums. I mean, I've read forums, and people have their own opinion. People say put them in dry, say put pipe dope on them and everything else. And I'll be honest with you, when I looked at the factory unit, there is absolutely no remnants of any kind of sealer at all, period, put on here. So I believe they put them in dry at the factory. But what I'm going to do, just to give a little bit of extra peace of mind, is I will install a very, very light coat of RTV on the threads itself. And this will, even though it's not a thread sealer per se, it'll be fine. So it'll, we'll put that in there. And I'm not going to leave a gunk on here. I'm going to rub it down into the threads, wipe the excess away, and then we'll be able to tell where it needs to be. So, but you want to make sure, if you do put any kind of sealer on here, don't use tape, because tape can come loose, and you don't want any exposed before the threads to get sucked into the pump. And you don't want any past the threads, but we can clean this off after we put it in the pump, but you don't want to put any past this. I'm just gonna grab a little bit on my finger and just put some around the threads here, like so. Wipe off the excess. And I'm gonna rub this down in these threads really good. Like I said, I'm gonna make sure that I don't have any past the threads. And then once I install it in the pump, I can wipe away any extras. And by doing that, that just kind of adds a little bit of protection to it. Wipe the very ends of these threads out, like so. And now we can go put it in the pump and get ready to tighten it down for the final tightness. It's really important. You don't want this backing out on you, so we're going to really tighten it down, because when I took the factory one loose, I had to use a pipe wrench to get it off. Right about there is perfect. I might could go one more full turn on it, but I mean, that's pretty tight. right there, and once that RTV settles, it's not going to move anyway. Another thing to think about is, even though it's sitting there, you see it like this, it's not going to ever get loose anyway, because you figure in the engine's upside down. It's going to be in the vehicle like that, so it's hanging in the direction in which it tightens anyway. So this is plenty tight enough. And now our marks are lined up perfectly. Our carburetor cleaner on a rag and just wipe these threads clean. Get that RTV out of there so there's none sticking out past the threads. Now that's nice and clean, and we can get ready to install it. If you remember in one of my old videos, I made this template based off the oil pump itself. You can see how this one fits perfectly on this oil pump. Now the reason for me doing that was I port matched the pump that I'm using to the block. So this hole in the block is now the exact same size hole that's in the oil pump. Well, I don't want to use this as a gasket, obviously. I probably could, but I don't want to. And to make my own, the gasket material I have is too thick. I don't want a thick gasket material because it'll raise the pump up some, and you don't need a thick gasket for an oil pump. So what we're gonna have to do is, this is the one provided in the kit. And you can see how I ain't really concerned about how it don't cover the hole fully. That don't matter, that's fine. What I want to do is we gotta trim out the gasket a little bit to match this port here now. So to do that, ways you could do it, you could put this up against a pump and do it, or do it this way. I'm gonna do it this way. I'm gonna put my bolts in it to hold it for me so it don't move. And I know exactly, this is pretty much exactly where it's gonna be. It actually kind of clears if I go all the way over this way. So as long as I make sure the gasket is all the way to the left when I install the pump and torque it down, then that right there will be fine. But it still has just a little bit I'm gonna clean out. So I'm gonna get my razor blade and trim that a little bit. So I went ahead and finished it up off camera. I just went ahead and cleaned it up a little bit and just took my razor blade. You wanna make sure you got a good sharp razor blade, and just kind of, I might clean that edge up a little bit there. These two sides here, but now it's got a nice radius, and if I go a little bit to the left, it'll definitely clear it now. We'll put our gasket on here facing the right direction, and you don't use any RTV or any kind of sealant. You just place the gasket on there and let it go. So now we're ready to install the oil pump. Now I did go with an ARP oil pump drive bolt just because I am running a high volume oil pump. I've ran high volumes before with the stock drive and never had an issue with it, but just for extra security this time I did go with the ARP bolt or ARP drive. In case you're wondering what the part number is for it, there it is right there. 4351 Cleveland to 400 oil pump drive shaft kit. So it's important that it don't matter if it's aftermarket like this or stock, you always have these retainers. This goes down into the block and sits there, and that keeps it for if you ever pull the distributor out, it don't pull the rod out with the distributor. So we're gonna put this down in the hole. See, you got that hole right down in there. It's kind of hard to get the camera in here and feed the rod in, but it's right there. And it just sits where that retainer sits on that hole so it don't fall through. All right, so now with our oil pump drive installed, we can install the oil pump. I always put it into the pump, the drive in the pump first, and then set the pump down. Now we can torque it down. Put our rod is in there. It should be able to move up and down, but not fall out of the pump. Hand tighten these down first, and then come back and torque them. So book says 351 Cleveland. The oil pump torque specs is 20 to 35 foot-pounds. So I would order to go 30 because it's in the middle, but since I have to use an extension to get on here, I'm just gonna go to 435. All right, that's a done install. Double check my measurements on this pickup tube to to make sure it did not move. And it actually did move a little bit, so. Can actually go just a touch more. Now we're pretty much here. We got about an 8 and an 8 on both sides now. We're perfectly even now. Another way you can check too is that I put my oil pan on. And I actually, see I got it bolted up tight to the block. You can look in here and see your pickup tube. And even though it don't show up well on camera, you can actually see a gap below the pickup tube in the oil pan. So there's plenty of space there for it to pick up oil. So that's perfect. Just wanted to show you that also. Alrighty guys, well that's all. That's the complete install now on installing an oil pump on a 351 Cleveland 400 and modified. And as well as installing the pickup tube. Like I said, I couldn't find hardly anything about installing oil pumps or pickup tubes on Clevelands and 400s. I don't stock ones, that is. I could find aftermarket ones, but stock ones is, you know, so hopefully this will help somebody out. Now, I can already hear in the comments, I don't need a high volume oil pump and blah, blah, blah. I get it. I know, I've heard it all. For me, I wanted a high volume oil pump because I'm not doing oil restrictor plugs or lifter bore bushings or none of that. And this is an engine that I want to last a long time. I want to have continuously have good oil pressure. So whether the high volume oil pump is a waste of time is up for debate. There's a lot of opinions about it. People say you need it, some people say you don't. And I probably don't need it, you know, really, but I wanted it. And that's just my own personal preference. And so that's why I decided to go with it. I have ran high volume oil pumps before and never had an issue with them whatsoever. You know, I know they're meant for deeper pans. That's why they're called high volume, more oil. But this is to maintain a good high oil pressure at idle. Like I said, it's a high volume standard pressure, so the high RPMs, it will not go no higher than stock. But at lower RPMs when it's hot, it will be higher, like maybe 30, 40 PSI at idle versus 20. So, and I know 20 is plenty for idle, I get that, but this is just my own personal preference. It's what I want. So I like to see it on the gauge, you know, that I have good oil pressure, and that's just what I want. So as far as robbing horsepower, people make debates, oh, it takes horsepower. An oil pump is not going to rob that much horsepower from an engine, period. And another thing is, I'm not going for horsepower here. It's, you know, it's going to be a cruiser, a lower torque pulling motor, you know. So I'm not going for top end horsepower anyway. But oil pump ain't going to steal that much horsepower from an engine, you know. It might be a little bit more noticeable on a high volume, high pressure one. Then maybe you might notice it more. But on a standard pressure, high volume, you're not going to really notice that much of a difference. So, and I do have I ordered a distributor as well, built for this engine. So, and we'll cover that in a future video. But anyway, that's all there is for this video. So if you like the video, give me a thumbs up. I'd appreciate it. If you're not subscribed, consider subscribing. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave them in the drop box down below. And that's all there is for this one. So until next time, I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.